Our senior national political reporter, Marc Caputo, is outside of the courthouse in West Palm Beach and on deadline for me, so I got to get to him fast. Ken Dilanian, our NBC News Justice Intelligence correspondent, is here with me on set, and Carol Lamb is our NBC News legal analyst and former U.S. attorney. Marc, you were in the courtroom. Look, I can tell you this. A lot of veterans of covering the Justice Department are surprised where the judge came down. Give us a little sense of why, the reasoning he gave of why he was leaning towards opening it.
Well, the government admitted in court, Jay Bratt, who's the DOJ's top national security official, that, look, this is an unprecedented case. There's unique interest in here. This is history, and it's important. Everyone agreed on that fact, including the judge. He had read, as he said, the search warrant affidavit ahead of time. He said he had an idea of what he might redact. He wanted to see what the government would do. So in the end, I guess if you're just kind of paying attention to this, the reality is you can't ignore the fact that this is probably the most important criminal case that we've seen in politics in the modern era, if not ever. It seems like everyone's admitting that. The question is, to what degree do we want what facts disclosed to the public and when?
Did the arguments that Justice was making, what was their main reasoning for why they believe this shouldn't be made public?
I mean, it sounded like if you didn't know there was a former president whose home was searched, you would think that this was a Mafia case. They were talking about threats to witnesses, investigative techniques they didn't want out there, sensitive information they didn't want released. The Jay Bratt, the national security official with DOJ, had mentioned the recent case of the FBI agents whose addresses or identities were doxed in right-wing media. And he mentioned there are, quote, amateur sleuths out there on the internet who can find out information about these other witnesses, and it could chill other witnesses from coming forward. So their main argument was like, look, if you release this, a direct quote he said, is this is a roadmap to the investigation. And he said it is early in the investigation currently, so there's a lot more time to spend, a lot more investigating to be done.
Marc Caputo, our eyewitness in the courtroom for us today. Marc, I know you're crashing on a deadline. I'll let you go. Ken Dilanian, you cover that building. You've covered it for quite a long time. It's not a surprise that Justice doesn't want to reveal. They never, whether it's the Intel Committee, sources admit, there's always an excuse. There's always a reason the government wants to keep a secret here. What do you expect? You know, do you expect them to essentially say, okay, here's what we want to redact, and then take a black magic marker and essentially color the entire piece of paper?
Well, first of all, I'm stunned that the judge is even agreeing to do this. The case law is against it, as our experts have said. But I do still think it will be heavily redacted. But this is the guy who signed the warrant. He knows what's in it, so he must think there's something the public can learn here. Beyond just the background of the FBI agent who filled out the affidavit. But everything that Marc just described, the sources and methods, the names of witnesses and agents, that has to be redacted. I don't see any circumstance under which that is released. And also, anything related to grand jury material is secret by law. Right. So if there were subpoenas that went down to Mar-a-Lago, that has to be redacted.
But isn't it fair? So the parts, though, then that we could end up seeing is when he says it's a roadmap to the investigation, what parts of it then do you expect that we might see?
Perhaps a broad kind of an assertion of what this case is about. And we now think we know that it's about more than just they wanted to get their documents back, because otherwise they wouldn't be fighting so hard to keep this secret. Right. And they've said this is an ongoing investigation involving these 3 statutes that go to the mishandling of government records. Yeah. So I think we're going to learn a little bit more about what they think may have happened here.
Carol Lamb, are you as surprised as Ken Dilanian?
I guess I'm surprised to an extent that it would have been easy and it would have been accepted if this judge had said, we're not even going to have a hearing. This is an ongoing investigation that's been represented to me by the Department of Justice. So I'm just going to exercise my discretion here and say we're not having a hearing, and you can appeal me if you want, media. But given that he granted the hearing, I did begin to suspect that he was going to start looking at whether redactions were a possibility. Now, remember that the Justice Department represented in their papers that they've already gone through this exercise. They already tried to see what the document would look like if they redacted everything that was confidential in their view, and they said the result would be incoherent to a reader. So they've already gone through this exercise, which is why I think they didn't ask for more time, because they've already made the decision that not much can be exposed. Having done a lot of search warrants, especially white-collar search warrants, I tried to put myself in the position of these prosecutors in what could possibly be disclosed. I don't think that they would even want to disclose the scope of the potential case, because that's just more than they would want to hand out at this time. They haven't made that decision. They don't know where the evidence is going to lead them down the road. What they would probably be willing to expose are the visits that they made to Mar-a-Lago in the past, because that's already been in the public domain. There are background things that you say in a search warrant. You might say, in my experience as an FBI agent, I know that documents are often kept in this form, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But these are really not going to tell you anything about the current investigation. So I think the department's going to come in very conservative. The judge will make his decision about whether he agrees or disagrees with the department. But remember, he was an assistant U.S. attorney for 11 years, and he worked for the Justice Department.
Is this appealable?
Yes.
It is absolutely appealable.
Okay.
It is appealable to the district court, then the appellate court, then, if necessary, the Supreme Court. So if the Justice Department is not satisfied with the judge's decision, no one's going to see anything for a while.
Is your sense, Ken, that they would be willing to file an appeal if they didn't like where this was headed by this judge?
Absolutely. There's such a sensitivity right now about exposing the names of FBI agents, for example.
Right.
You know, two were leaked when the warrant was
some news organization posted, right?
Yes, and they
got the version leaked from another source, not the government.
And there have been threats against those particular agents. And now the Trump folks are talking about putting out the surveillance video of the search, and the Justice Department has formally asked news organizations, if they do that, please blur out the faces of FBI agents.
Carol, big picture here. To me, the most important news story, the most important development over the last 48 hours was that Justice was fighting this. I mean, doesn't that tell you that this is not about just getting some classified documents back into the hands of the U.S. government?
Chuck, I've never thought that this was only about getting the documents back. I don't think that the department would use these techniques if it was just about getting the documents back, because you're supposed to use search warrants in furtherance of a criminal investigation. And if there are classified or even sensitive documents out there, and they execute a search warrant, and for that matter, grand jury subpoenas, which we've now been told took place, there has to be a good faith belief that somebody may be criminally liable here. So none of that is surprising to me, but I have a lot of concern about what's going to happen in the future regarding search warrants.
Ken, does Trump's lawyers get to see the affidavit?
They're going to get to see whatever we see.
Yeah, that's why they want it released. They want to see the whole thing. That's why it's easy for them to say, hey, release the whole thing, because they want to know the scope of the investigation.
Strategically, that helps them. But they didn't ask for the release in court. And I was wondering whether that's because it may help them strategically, but it could be terrible for the president as a public relations matter.
Interesting. Ken Dilanian, Carol Lamb, before that, Marc Caputo, who was on site for us. Thank you all. I think I understand this better, which is the point of the segment. So.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.